but it wasn't. My parents watched the 10 o'clock news, and it wasn't on. So anyway, and that's what they had. That's what this guy was doing. Yes. For those just tuning in, just talking about my notoriety last night at the baseball game, how I was interviewed by some reporter from the Fox channel in Philadelphia, who was just walking around the stadium looking for Phillies fans, and I was proudly dressed as in my Bryce Harper jersey over my jacket. Now, the story behind that was that I took the Metro down and I had that jersey on under my jacket. And when I got to Navy Yard, there were, I would say, 2-1 Phillies fans versus Nationals fans coming out. And I'm waiting for Elon and Eitan to come too, because they're coming from different places. And so I took off my jacket, took off the jersey, put the jacket on, and jersey on top of the jacket, and people are high-fiving me and go Phillies. And it was great. It was great. So it was a lot of fun. My son, Elon, was wearing his Eagles cap, and Eitan was wearing a 76ers cap. So we had our Philadelphia garb out there. So that was fun. Right. I know, but it was quite the experience being at the game last night, and I've never been to any sporting event like that. I mean, I've watched, of course, on TV, but to be in person, to all the booing for Bryce Harper, and I really, yeah, that's right. It was unbelievable. So you understand, you can't, like the ice that goes through their veins, these athletes, to be able to withstand the noise in the background. So anyway, what does this have to do with Passover? Sorry for the people watching, like you're wondering, what does this have to do with anything? So welcome to the first Wednesday class, contemporary Jewish issues, and Passover is not a contemporary Jewish issue. It is something that is celebrated contemporarily, but is the oldest of all the Jewish holidays that we observe. So it's not the oldest ritual. The bris, circumcision, is the oldest of that. And Shabbat, we're told that God rested, but it's unclear whether Shabbat was really observed yet. But Passover in Egypt, for the Exodus itself and the blood on the doorpost to be protected from the 10th plague, and then to be roasting a lamb, which they had to do in Egypt as well, laid the groundwork for observing Passover every year. So, of course, that is the main ritual of Passover. That is what became the Seder from that description in the 12th chapter of Exodus of gather around, eat the roasted lamb, be dressed, ready to travel, is the base, and tell your children about the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the 10 plagues, and God's involvement in the whole story. That certainly is the whole basis for the ritual. But the other aspect of it, of course, is eating matzah. So unfortunately, the recipe for matzah that we use today, that we say is as ancient in Egypt, it's really unclear exactly what the Israelites made. What was that bread-like substance that they made that didn't have time to rise? And there are some people who suggest that it could have been pita. And I've never baked pita, but those of you who have had pita, falafel or shawarma inside pita, know it's a thin bread, and it does not take long to rise. Actually, you just need a hot stove to put the dough on, and it doesn't take that long to make. So it's possible that the Israelites made pita when they were leaving Egypt. That certainly would be a lot more tasty for just have special kosher for Passover pita, right? Because matzah, if you think about it, we're not supposed to eat grain products, anything made out of 5 grains on Passover, except for matzah. So, okay, have your kosher for Passover wheat flour to make pita. Why not? Dip that in some hummus if you eat legumes. And then Passover doesn't seem so bad anymore. Well, the rabbi said, hold on one second. That's not the recipe that we use. And the recipe that we have is the matzah, the cracker that we know about. But so I don't want to talk about the matzah part of this. I want to talk about the chametz part and how we have to get rid of chametz for Passover and the significant amount of laws that surround that make Passover a pretty intimidating kind of holiday to follow to the fullest. So the Torah tells us that we're supposed to observe the holiday of Matzot for 7 days. Okay, so the holiday, the observance of Passover becomes known as the matzah holiday, Chag HaMatzot, that we're supposed to eat the matzah for 7 days of the holiday. And of course, outside of Israel, it's 8 days. And that's a discussion for another time. We are supposed to rid ourselves of all leavened products. So one word for that is seor, the letter sin, aleph, resh. That's the leavened products, which is also called chametz. So we're supposed to rid ourselves of that as we observe the holiday of Passover. And so, but to remind us, why are we getting rid of the chametz? Because the chametz is what was used to, it's the leavening agent that makes bread rise, and that's why the Israelites didn't have time to have their bread rise. So by refraining from eating chametz on Passover, we're remembering the quick turnaround that the Israelites had in order to get out, and remembering the exodus from Egypt. I'm going to share a little bit spiritually about some thoughts about the chametz in a little bit, but I want to get into how the rabbis take the get rid of chametz from your homes and develop this whole system of kosher for Passover. So not having leavened products in your possession would lead the rabbis to understand that we have to absolutely get rid of all the chametz in our homes. And it's not just the food that you can see that's in boxes or Tupperware or whatever kind of containers that we have them in the house, but it's also the crumbs that are left over from eating those food products. And it's also the utensils that have been used to eat those food products and to cook those food products. So the rabbis then extended not have chametz in your possession to anything that comes into contact with that chametz. And also they take it quite literally to not even a microscopic amount of chametz is allowed. So this is an important feature about the kosher laws for Passover, in that during the year, if there's something unkosher, and let's say mixing meat and milk, that happens by accident, a small amount of milk, for example, that might by accident have dropped into a big pot of chicken soup does not invalidate the chicken soup from being consumed. Because if the drops of milk that went into the chicken soup were less than 1/60th the volume of the chicken soup, then it does not invalidate the chicken soup, and you can still eat it. Only if it's an accident. If you do it on purpose to flavor the soup, then you have to get rid of the soup. But it's by accident, it's okay. There's no such thing as a by accident for Passover. If a little bit of chametz is left over and you find it in your house, it invalidates everything, and you have to start over again. So searching for so there's the tradition of searching for chametz, cleaning the house of to make sure that there's no chametz left over, and changing over, either koshering the utensils that we use to cook the food, to kosher it in a way so that those pots and pans and plates and whatnot, if they are of a material that can be koshered, then you can do that for Passover. Or most people have a totally separate set of meat and milk Passover dishes and transfer the regular the year-round utensils to another place and put the special Passover utensils in a prominent place to be used for Passover. There is also then chametz. Then is anything made from 5 grain products that the rabbis determined are the 5 products that would be used to make bread, and that would be wheat, barley, oat, rye, or spelt. So then anything made from that, matzah can be made from that, and anything made from that otherwise is chametz. So the question that the rabbis had over the centuries, depending whether they're Ashkenazi or Sephardi, is whether other grain products like corn or rice count as chametz. So unfortunately, as Ashkenazi Jews, we say, and have our ancestor rabbis have said, that corn and rice are grain products, and we cannot eat them on Passover. Anything that is a grain, not just of the 5. You can't have matzah made from corn or rice, but you cannot eat corn or rice on Passover. Sephardi Jews said, and if only we were Sephardi, our menu would be broadened. Sephardi rabbis said in the Middle Ages, no, why are you Ashkenazi rabbis adding more things to the list that we can't eat? The 5 grains are the 5 grains. We find some new products like corn or rice. Don't add them to this list. No reason to. So Sephardi Jews do eat corn and rice on Passover. And then there's also the question about legumes, what are known in Hebrew as kitniot. That's just the Hebrew terminology for mostly for beans. Okay, so beans like garbanzo beans, chickpeas, peas themselves, lima beans, stuff like that. According to the rabbis, you cannot eat those on Passover either, because for 2 reasons. In the shuk, in the marketplace, often rice and beans are sold right next to each other. And you would often find these dried beans, like lentils and whatnot, mixed in with the rice, and it would be a lot of work to sift through these products to get rid of them. And since they're next to each other, and also when you cook them, the second reason, when you cook these beans, you cook them in a way that is similar to cooking these other grain products, and it looks like these grain products when you cook these beans, and so therefore you cannot use those on Passover either. And Sephardi Jews again said, whoa, Ashkenazi rabbis, what are you doing adding more to our restricted items that we can't eat on Passover? No, according to Sephardi Jews, do eat kitniot, do eat beans. So they eat corn and rice, and they eat these beans as well. So in America, which is mostly an Ashkenazi Jewish, of the 6 million Jews that are in America, or 7 million, whatever it is, most of us are Ashkenazi Jews. So the kashrut agencies are run by Ashkenazi rabbis. So it's most common to find kosher for Passover products that are kosher according to Ashkenazi Jewish law. And it's only in Israel mainly, and now some stores in the New York area sell them too. It's only in Israel that you can find kosher or Passover products that are kosher for Sephardi Jews. So you have to know Hebrew to read the label in the store that says Kasher lePesach leOchle kitniot, which means it's kosher for Passover for those who eat kitniot. Okay, so you have to be careful in Israel what you're buying, because the processed foods could have corn, rice, or these bean products in the food. And so several years ago, when I was in rabbinical school, so it's more than several years ago, I was thinking about when I was in Israel for Passover several years ago for my number 3 child's trip to Israel with the Jewish day school. So we all went to be in Israel for Passover. So that was just a few years ago. But I was thinking about that, but then remembered that I was in rabbinical school when the halacha class, the Jewish law class that was required in rabbinical school, was taught by Rabbi David Galinkin. So he taught us about the halachic, the rabbis who taught halacha from the Middle Ages and their books, and taught this whole notion of kitniot and how Ashkenazi rabbis and Sephardi rabbis in the 1200s and 1300s were debating with each other through the manuscripts about whether these items are kosher or not. And so it's quite clear that the Ashkenazi rabbis added a fence around the law for an extra protection, because it seems to be in the same category of grains, and it looks like grains when you cook them. The Ashkenazim said, it's just easier to say all of this stuff is not kosher for Passover. The Sephardi rabbis were willing to give the women, because it's the women who did the shopping, and they recognized that from their time in the 1200s, 1300s, that the women are doing the cooking. Women are smart enough to know the difference between corn and rice and the other 5 grains, and also the beans as well. And the Sephardi rabbis said, you know what, we're not going to add this fence. There's no reason to add the fence here to protect the laws of Passover. Nothing about Passover is going to be impacted by allowing us to eat these 2 grains, corn and rice, and these beans. So we're going to let this happen. And because of that it's clear from the Ashkenazi sources that it's just a layer of protection. Oh, and the Ashkenazi rabbi said, if you are in a Sephardi home for Passover, you can eat their food. And just don't eat if they serve you beans and rice or corn, just don't eat it. But you can eat other things off their plates. So in other words, if the Ashkenazi rabbis are saying this stuff is not kosher for Passover, they should say outright, you can't eat in a Sephardi home if you are invited there for Passover. So for the Ashkenazi, it was more important to create community and enhance community, and just say, for your tradition, your custom is not to eat it, but just push it to the side, even if it's on the plate. So you have all the side dishes, and one of them's rice, but the other is, whatever protein it is, and some vegetables. Eat the vegetables and the protein, but just don't eat the rice. So in other words, even if the rice is touching the protein, it does not invalidate the protein as now being not kosher for Passover, because it touched something that we think is chametz. So because of the fence, and because the rabbis agreed that we're adding this fence and it's not really not kosher for Passover, Rabbi Galinkin and other Ashkenazi authorities today say, if you wish, you can eat that for Passover and you can serve it. So I've been trying to lobby my wife in serving this, but she won't do it. She's more wedded to the custom and to the tradition. And there are people in our family too that would prefer that. But when we were in Israel for my daughter's trip to Israel, I did eat kitniot there. I mean, we didn't bring it into the apartment that we were staying in, but when we went out to eat, I took advantage of eating the kitniot. So it was and in Israel there is so much. It's like you're not giving up anything to eat kosher for Passover in Israel, because lots of the restaurants are still kosher themselves, and you can get kosher for Passover pasta, which tastes pretty good, and lots of other things like that. So it's not like it's any hardship in Israel. And today, especially in the New York area where there's lots of foods available. So for example, if you're vegetarian, a lot of options today, especially if you're vegan, call for coconut milk as a milk substitute in some soups and other recipes. And it might not be so easy to get kosher for Passover coconut milk. See, processed foods have to have a kosher or Passover symbol on them. And I'll get into that. Non-processed foods, if it's all natural, you don't necessarily have to have it kosher or Passover, but coconut milk, there's a process of opening the coconut, taking it out and whatever, getting the milk out of it. There's a process involved there. It has to be kosher or Passover. So my older daughter, who works in Teaneck, this huge kosher supermarkets in Teaneck, and she was there last week, called my wife and said, "Ooh, I'm going to be coming to you for Passover. Is there anything here in this store that you don't think you can get down by you that you need?" And yes, they had kosher, several brands to choose from of kosher for Passover coconut milk. So yes, so yeah, several brands to choose from. Yes. So the chametz. Anything that has chametz in it invalidates it for Passover, and invalidates it. So if the food is prepared with chametz, then absolutely the whole factory would have to be koshered in order to make it kosher for Passover. So, for example, Coca-Cola or other sodas that have high fructose corn syrup in it. So for Passover, they're made, as one of our people here is opening a can of soda, just on cue. For Passover, those sodas to be kosher for Passover would have to have cane sugar and not corn syrup in it. So there are some people who stock up on the kosher for Passover Coca-Cola because the recipe is the original recipe with cane sugar and not corn syrup, and some people can claim they can tell the difference in taste by the case. Oh, and Mexican Coca-Cola. Oh, made with cane sugar, right? So now there's still the processing. It still has to have a kosher for Passover label on it. So when the Rabbinical Assembly, the Organization of Conservative Rabbis, has a law committee that has a separate kashrut subcommittee of it that produces a Passover guide every year, which essentially is just updating the guide from one year to the next based on different things that happen in the food industry and how it affects kosher for Passover products. So this kosher for Passover guide, which if anybody is interested in it, just email me and I can send you the link for it. It's a little bit complicated, but it talks about how to kosher the kitchen, what things, how to kosher everything in the kitchen, and to the level of cleaning that it needs in order to be kosher, from the kitchen sink to the countertops to the stove tops and the ovens and the refrigerator, main things that come into contact with food. And then also the shelves in the cupboard that on which you store your dishes and glassware, and the dishes and glassware themselves, whether they can be kosher for Passover or not, depending on the material that they're made out of. So there's a whole section that deals with that. And then it deals with the foods, which I just went over, in terms of those things that might have chametz in them and what chametz is. And then here are the things that you can buy that before Passover that don't need to have a kosher for Passover symbol on them, because there's no chance that they have any chametz in it at all. And so for example, cheese, if you buy kosher cheese, the kosher cheese you buy is kosher for Passover cheese, because they only make cheese there. And how the cheese is made from the milk or the cream and the enzyme that's put in it, there is nothing chametz about that at all. And they are so well regulated that people who work there are not allowed to bring in food when they're working, and the vats that these things are, and tubs and barrels that the cheese is made in, does not come into contact with anything else, that kosher cheese is by definition kosher for Passover, because there's nothing else. Milk, also, if you okay, so so these are foods. Milk gets into a category that's that's a second layer. Yes.
Why is like millers or other people bought some?
Yes.
Label their cheese kosher for Passover.
Well, so that label, that kosher for Passover, Miller's cheese, I buy Miller's cheese during the year and it says kosher for Passover on it. So yeah, so it's kosher for Passover year round. It has it there. So another thing is kosher grape juice or kosher wine is the same thing. That it's automatically kosher for Passover, and it has the symbol OUP or whatever, OK, whatever other main national kosher supervisor, but it's mainly OU. So Kedem, for example, Kedem grape juice is kosher for Passover. It's OUP year round when you buy it. So because the process is the same. That there's absolutely no chametz that would ever get into it. There's nothing chametz about grapes. Grapes are kosher for Passover. Milk, by definition, I mean from the cow, not the final product with the vitamin A and D. But before that, milk by definition is kosher year round, and so therefore cheese and grape juice and wine kosher are kosher for Passover. So there are other products like eggs. Nothing is done to eggs. So, right, nobody puts chametz inside of the eggshell and then sells it as eggs. So you don't do that. Fresh fruits and vegetables also don't need kosher Passover symbol on it. And it says here also baking soda and bicarbonate of soda. So those products also don't need a kosher Passover. Kosher meat does not need a symbol on it that says it's kosher for Passover, because also the koshering of the meat and the kosher markets and the butchers that sell it, they have special rules. You're not allowed to eat as a worker when you're cutting the meat and packaging the meat. So there's no chance that any chametz would be in there when they're cutting the meat and packaging it. Regular tea, that is pure black, green, or white tea leaves. So if you look at your package of tea, if you drink tea, or your coffee, on a regular coffee, not decaf, regular coffee, instant or whatever, as if it says kosher on it, it's kosher for Passover, because there's no chance if it's unflavored and it's just plain coffee or tea, then so it's only the flavored teas, like the fruit flavored teas, or decaf coffee or tea. The process of decaffeination has chametz in it, and the flavorings then adds a processing to it that could be chametz, and those things would need a kosher for Passover symbol on them. Yes. Right, that's a flavored tea. That counts as a flavored tea, because tea in this category are the tea leaves themselves, not the other pieces of dried fruit that become tea, that are mixed with tea, or even just by tea themselves. So it's all processed, and therefore the processing has chametz in it. Olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, also does not need to be kosher for Passover, because the processing of the extra virgin, there's nothing else in it except for olive oil. Whole or gutted fresh fish, and whole or half pecans, and whole unground spices and nuts. Unground spices. So in other words, your peppercorns, that's an unground spice, or I don't know, a coriander pod before you grind it up. You could grind it yourself if you want to, sure, absolutely. Whole unground before is kosher for Passover by definition. There are other things that if you buy them before Passover, that you can use them on Passover, because even though there might be a potential of having chametz in it, that potential is goes away when we officially sell our chametz for Passover. So yes, so we laugh at this, but the rabbis intentionally found these loopholes in the laws in order to make it as easy as possible for us to observe it, and financially easy as possible. The whole cleaning process is not easy, but it can be a financial burden to buy, because we know when we buy kosher or Passover products that the very same thing is a couple dollars cheaper. And the critics, the cynics, will say you just put a label on it, and you can charge $2 more for this product that you haven't done anything to. So that's what the cynics say.
Well, when I was growing up,
Yes.
go to this mom and pop grocery store.
Right.
And I remember sometimes, oh, can I do this? Is put the labels on apple sauce.
Right.
Just I didn't have a whole.
Right. So Barbara's talking about the mom and pop store that had the kosher Passover labels that were just put on these same products. You think they're put on the same products, and they are magically become kosher Passover. So I don't want to say that was the case. I think that a rabbi went to the Mott's applesauce factory, whatever applesauce factory it was in Brooklyn, wherever they got the shipment from, and where the rabbi said, yes, this is kosher Passover. Instead of making a new packaging, which would cost the company money, they provided labels for the store owners to put on. That is the way it's supposed to be. So hopefully that's the way it was. But again, some cynics would say, oh, look, can we really trust this particular store? Do they know what they're doing in putting the kosher Passover label on it? Because if you find it on the bacon, then you know that maybe the owner of the store is not. So there are some items that potentially could have chametz in them, but really, if it could be a minuscule amount. So what I'm thinking of is milk. The vitamin A and D that is added to milk are chemicals. And those chemicals, that's why for some, milk needs to have a kosher symbol on it, because where does that vitamin A or D come from? And when I took the kashrut seminar a few years back at the seminary, the guy teaching this class, who's the expert on all these food products, said that some of the vitamin A or D comes from shark. Shark is not a kosher fish. And so therefore you have trafe in your milk. And though it might be less, if you have a gallon of milk with vitamin A and D, it might still be less than 1/60th. If you're buying it on purpose, then you're not supposed to really do that. And you should have kosher milk where the vitamin A and D comes from a kosher source. But that chemical could have chametz in it. Could. So it's not necessarily so that it does. There are so when we sell our chametz before Passover, it gives us the opportunity to fulfill the law that says in the Torah, do not have chametz in your possession. If you sell the chametz, it's not in your possession. You can keep it in your house, locked away somewhere. You fill out the form, give it to me, and I sell everybody's chametz to someone who is not Jewish, who has the right actually to knock on your door and ask for some bread or potato chips or whatever, or beer, or whatever chametz that you might have, because it's actually belongs to him because you sold it to him. He doesn't do this non-Jew that I sell it to, but he knows that he's helping us fulfill our our obligation to get rid of our chametz in a financially feasible way. The same thing happens. So then we search for the chametz the night before the Seder. So this year, Thursday night, April 18th, would be the time to search for chametz. So we've already cleaned our homes by then. It should be spick and span ready for Passover, no chametz in it, but you reserve a couple of big pieces of chametz, like, I don't know, like what we do, some Cheerios. Put them in a paper bag, and you recite some. It's in the first page of the Haggadah, searching for chametz. It's an Aramaic paragraph, but you could say it in English too. I hereby look for all the chametz, and by looking for the chametz and putting it together here, I certify that anything that's left in my house now is considered like the dust of the earth. And then the next morning, after here we do it after our study session. I get a barbecue grill. I have the lulav, vim, and myrtle branches, willow branches, left over from Sukkot, drying in my office. That's supposed to be kindling for burning your chametz. So I put that in the barbecue grill. People bring their chametz bags, and I recite that same paragraph again. I hereby, by burning the chametz, we're getting rid of everything that we know of that could possibly be in our possession, and everything else should be like the dust of the earth. By doing that, anything that we buy before Passover, like 100% fruit juice. So Tropicana, by the way, you look in the supermarket now, Tropicana orange juice says kosher for Passover on it in Hebrew words. It says kasher lePesach in it, on it. It doesn't have to if it's 100% orange juice. No sugar added, no other chemicals added. If it's 100% orange juice, you can buy it before Passover as long as it says kosher on it, and it would be kosher for Passover. But we don't have to worry about that because, like I said, Tropicana says kosher for Passover. You can buy filleted fish. So go to Costco, for example, the big package of salmon that they have, like a 5-pound filleted salmon. You can buy that before Passover and use it on Passover. Because even though it doesn't say kosher on it, the factory that they get it from, or the Costco warehouse where they're slicing up the salmon, they're not doing anything else except slicing up salmon in there. So whatever knife they're using, there might be a chance that they could use that knife on something else that could have chametz on it. But they wash it in between, but that might not be enough. And so therefore, there could be a minuscule amount of chametz on that knife that's filleting that 5-pound piece of fish. By doing the selling and the burning of the chametz, you can use that salmon on Passover. It's kosher for Passover. Frozen fruit, 100% frozen fruit with no additives to it, can be bought before Passover and used on Passover. Pure white sugar, no additives, can be bought before Passover and used on Passover. Quinoa with nothing else mixed in. You have to be careful that it's kosher quinoa. If it's kosher quinoa, then it doesn't have to be kosher for Passover quinoa, because the kosher quinoa will be sure that there's nothing else mixed in. Like there's no grains. Sometimes grains could be mixed in a factory in Bolivia or Peru, because that's where quinoa grows in the high Andes. It doesn't grow anywhere else in the world. And so the processing plants are there in Peru and Bolivia, and it's possible that there are grains in those plants too. So as long as you can be clear that it's 100% quinoa, you can buy it before Passover. And white milk, not chocolate milk, but white milk before Passover, again, with the vitamin A and D, as long as it's kosher, you can use it during Passover, and non-iodized salt. Right, so we're supposed to buy iodized salt in order to get iodine in our diet, but you can buy non-iodized salt. The iodine, the chemical processing of making it edible, might have chametz in it, so you can't have, unless it's kosher for Passover, iodized salt. You can buy non-iodized salt before Passover to use on Passover. Yes, Miriam. So soy sauce, again, soy is kitniot. So if you say that you want to eat kitniot on Passover, then the soy sauce has to be 100% soy sauce. But I believe there's no such thing. I think there are other additives to this that are added to soy sauce to make it soy sauce. I believe it's fermented, right? So the fermenting of it could make it already, by definition, not kosher for Passover. So because I've never bought these legume products for my home. So tofu is the same thing. Tofu is made from soy. If there's such a thing as 100% soy tofu with no additives to it, then yes, you can use that on Passover. If it's 100%, but I'm not sure there's such a thing as 100% soy tofu with no other additives to it. It might have to say gluten-free on it. So gluten-free is a very strict standard so the gluten would be from a wheat product. So again, you'd have to look very carefully at the packaging. I've told vegans or people with Crohn's or celiac who can't eat grain products at all year round, what are they going to do on Passover then about avoiding matzah? You can get oat matzah. And people who are with celiac can usually eat oat matzah, but oat matzah is very expensive. And then you want to be able to eat tofu or rice. I would say absolutely eat rice. And for the tofu, you have to be very careful about the packaging. Again, all these products that can be purchased before Passover cannot be purchased during Passover to be used on a holiday. So that's the level here that we go to with chametz. So what I said that I wanted to do is talk about the spirituality of chametz, just to get this sense here. So I present these laws, and they are very strict. And those of us who keep kosher already know how strict it is to keep kosher. But you get into the habit of it, and I've grown up kosher, so it's like not a big deal to me to be part of this. But someone is adopting kashrut as a lifestyle later in life, it's hard to change your habits like that. It's like dieting or exercise. It's a hard thing to do. But once you get into the routine, then it becomes second nature. But the Passover is a whole other category. But there are a lot of people who might not keep kosher during the year, but keep kosher for Passover in their own way. And so I've heard of people who actually will refrain from eating bread on Passover, but and I'm serious about this. We'll have matzah with their crab cakes. So, I mean, people have told me this. To each their own. God, you can't have your crab cake on a hamburger bun because it's Passover. So you have to have it on matzah instead. So again, I like I said, it's funny, and I'm not making fun of people who do that. And people do things in their own way, but people find keeping Passover to be a very important thing to do, like fasting for Yom Kippur, same thing. But the common thing to do now is that to do the Seder at a convenient time. So this year, and last year, the Seder is on a Friday night. But I think next year it's not. It's a weekday. So a lot of people find that a weekday Seder is inconvenient. So they'll move the Seder back to the previous weekend or to the next weekend and just do Seder on the weekend, even though it's not the correct time to do it. So again, people do things the way they want to do things. But the idea, I knew that there was a spiritual dimension to what chametz represents and why we need to get rid of chametz. So My Jewish Learning is a great website to go to for everything you want to know about being Jewish and about all aspects of Jewish holidays, Shabbat, Kashrut, and other Jewish concepts. So myjewishlearning.com is a great site. So there, if you look up spiritual meaning of chametz, My Jewish Learning is the first site that comes up, and it's a an article by Rabbi Kerry Olitsky. So so he says the rabbis suggest that the leaven, the chametz, transcends the physical world. This leaven, this chametz, symbolizes a puffiness of self, an inflated personality, and egocentricity that threatens to eclipse the essential personality of the individual. Ironically, it is what prevents the individual from rising spiritually and moving closer to holiness. Thus, what chametz effectively does in the material world is exactly what it precludes in the realm of the spirit. That's why it has to be removed. So you add chametz, leavening, yeast, to grain products, it makes it rise. But if we want to rise spiritually, the chametz prevents us from rising spiritually because we can't have it on Passover. So it becomes this metaphorical obstacle for us to be rising spiritually and in a sacred way. Rabbi Arthur Waskow calls this kind of chametz the swollen sourness in our lives. Some people say chametz is also a term for the evil inclination in ourselves, which is understood by the rabbis to be part of every individual's psycho-spiritual makeup. The evil inclination is part of a complex of natural drives and urges that is held in balance by its opposite, the inclination to do good. So the chametz then is this material then understood by the rabbis that prevents us from spiritually becoming the people we can be, and it also represents the evil inclination. And so there is that spiritual dimension to getting rid of chametz for Passover. It's not just this physical thing that we're doing. It's not just the ritual that we're doing every year, but it is a spiritual process, kind of like, though I don't know too much about it, kind of like Lent before Easter, right? You hear about people giving something up for Lent. So that's the idea, that people who really are into it spiritually find meaning in giving something up and the humility of that. And that's why I see commercials for fish sandwiches at McDonald's and all these other places at this time of year, because a lot of people give up meat for Lent. So, because in Jewish tradition, there were people at the time that the temple was destroyed who stopped eating meat, because meat reminded us of the sacrifices that were offered in the temple. And how could we eat meat when meat couldn't be offered in the temple anymore? So there were some for a while. There were rabbis quoted in the Mishnah who were not eating meat because of that. Now it's not, and that's also why there are some people who don't eat lamb on Passover, because we wait until the temple is. We're supposed to wait until the temple is rebuilt to offer the lamb Passover sacrifice once again. Everybody ate lamb because everybody was supposed to bring their own lamb or chip in with other families to bring a lamb for Passover, so that was their meal. And you brought it to the temple, it was sacrificed there, and then roasted there. And it was like a huge communal barbecue that was happening in the precincts of the temple in Jerusalem. And so people say, huh? Yes, absolutely delicious, right? If you've ever had lamb, it's delicious. But anyway, obviously I'm not a vegetarian, and sorry about that, vegetarians who are watching out there. But there are people, Sephardic Jews do eat lamb on Passover, to be reminded of the, and we have the shank bone on the Seder plate that's supposed to be we're supposed to remind us of the lamb sacrifice. So it depends on your tradition whether you eat the lamb for Passover or not. So these things that we do then, these rituals, a lot of people get into the minutia of the details, and to make sure they're doing it right. And that's absolutely, we should be doing that. And it's supposed to provide us meaning as well, and feel as if we're part of the covenant and feel commanded to do this. And there's something spiritual in the sense of feeling commanded to do it. But if that's not enough, there are these added meanings to it too. Why are we getting rid of chametz? It's something about ourselves that we're getting rid of, and maybe this process for Passover can carry over beyond Passover, and we can remain humble as well. So, any other thoughts or comments or questions about this? So, we'll do some more of this on Shabbat, April 13th. I'll have an Ask the Rabbi session after the service about last minute questions that people might have about Passover. And I wish everyone happy and healthy and kosher Passover. That is the greeting for Passover. May have a zisen, a sweet and kosher Passover. And may the process not feel overwhelming or intimidating, but it should be spiritual.